It is the Resistance Report for July 12th, 2017. Good evening. Now, we here at the Resistance Report want to remind you, try to integrate various stories. This is not a news broadcast. It's a broadcast that gives you context, enables you to see the connections between various things, connect the dots. We're also on podcast in case you miss us, but it is live, and one of the advantages of live is that you can send us your questions as we provide you with that context. Please do, because I'll be answering your questions just a little bit later. Let me, though, start and talk about what is actually going on, because it's more than just a bunch of emails revealed by Donald Trump Jr. about what happened in last June of 2016. It connects a lot of things that we know or want to know. It also reveals a lot about Donald Trump's overall strategy. And some new news today is very important in that regard. Two pieces of new news. One, for example, that it's reported today that Congressional and Justice Department investigators are now turning their attention to whether the Trump campaign, and in particular its digital operation, that compiled detailed data on voters in various voting districts, worked with Russian operatives to help them identify precincts where Hillary Clinton could be particularly vulnerable to these kinds of fake news robotic bots. That is, in other words, whether the Trump campaign helped Russia disseminate fake news. Now, that's connected very, very clearly to the news that has dominated over the last couple of days in terms of those emails. But let me focus on just a particular aspect of those emails. Because you recall, and Donald Trump Jr. released the emails himself when he knew the New York Times was just about to release them, the intermediary, there's somebody who Donald Trump Jr. has trusted, a business associate who sent the emails saying that the Crown Prosecutor of Russia offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary Clinton and would be very useful to Donald Trump Sr. And the email went on to say, this is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is, and I want to emphasize this part of the email, I'm not sure it's got enough attention, it's obviously high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Underscore. This is dirt on Hillary Clinton from Russia, and it is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. What do you think is the best way of getting this information to him, and so on? Now, what did Donald Trump Jr. do? Well, we know that he did not alert the FBI right away. I mean, this is a clear violation of law. This is Donald Trump Jr., very close to Donald Trump, presumably, his son, very close to the campaign, right in the middle of the campaign, getting information, clear information. If he didn't have it before, he probably did, but this is actually proof that he had it, that Russia was not only working for Donald Trump, but Russia was getting information, and Russia was about to get the information on Hillary Clinton, had already got it, and about to turn it over to the Trump campaign. There was no alerting of the FBI. There was no expression of concern. The only expression from Donald Trump Jr. was, great, bring it on. If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Especially later in the summer. Let's have that information out later in the summer, Donald Trump Jr. said. And what happened later in the summer? You remember later in the summer, those hacked emails of the Democratic National Committee, John Podesta and so on, were released through unclear ways, mysterious ways. But less than a week later, after this particular set of emails got to Donald Trump about the fact that Russia had this information, dirt on Hillary Clinton, and wanted to pass it on to the Trump campaign, There was a meeting with a Russian operative very close to the Kremlin, a meeting with Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya, attended by Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner and then Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. Now, I've been involved in a lot of campaigns. You don't just have a meeting with anybody. You have a meeting when it looks like this is really important. They clearly expected to get the dirt right there, and it looks awfully like this was an ongoing process. There was no question about or concern about Russian involvement. And then later in the summer, Russian hacks, as I said, materials that hurt Hillary Clinton, help Donald Trump. We are in a new stage of this Trump-Russian connection, friends, because this is evidence of not only law-breaking, but potentially this is evidence of treason. Now, some of you have expressed to me your concern that this is a diversion. This is just gets us off track. Stacey Van Deen, one of the people on this page, you write, does it get us single payer, more jobs? Does it clean up the environment? Does it fix Flint? Does it stop wars? Nobody cares about this Russian nonsense but the TV boobs and the Hillbots. Well, Stacey, to the extent that your remark represents the views of others, and I have got similar views from a number of others, let me just pause to say that this Russian scandal, as it's emerging, the connection between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives to interfere on behalf of Trump in the 2016 election, has a direct connection to everything else you mentioned. Healthcare and the environment, cleaning up Flint, doing everything else we want to do, because you can only do that through a democracy. A democracy gives us, you and me and everybody else, the means, the wherewithal to do what a democracy ought to do, and to get on with what a democracy ought to get on with in terms of social justice and the environment, everything else you're concerned with. But if our democracy isn't working, if it's being undermined, if our voting system, if our election of 2016 actually was corrupted, then we can't even begin to get on with it. If working with Russia to undermine our democracy was something that, in fact, the Trump campaign or even Donald Trump himself did in 2016, what's to stop Russia from doing exactly the same thing in 2018 or 2020? What's to stop the Trump campaign from continuing to work behind the scenes with Russia in trying to rig future elections? There is nothing. If, in fact, all of this smoke that's getting thicker and thicker and thicker reveals a fire of corruption of our democratic system by foreign operatives working with a candidate in 2016, then our democracy is seriously and fundamentally threatened. Which means that everything we believe about representative government, everything we believe about the Constitution, everything we want our country to do and stand for and accomplish cannot be done. Stacey, do you understand these connections? We can't get single payer. We can't get more jobs. We can't clean up Detroit because the system has been fundamentally corrupted. Now, some of you may say, well, it's already corrupted by big money. Yes, we've got to get big money into politics, but you can't even begin to do that if the system is so corrupted that people of goodwill and good meaning cannot even be elected president or to any other office. The other thing that you ought to keep in mind is that if this goes where it looks like it is going, this is treason. I mean, I lived through Watergate. I know what Richard Nixon did, which is peanuts compared to this, if in fact Donald Trump or the Trump campaign was involved in this. And Richard Nixon and Watergate and the impeachment of Richard Nixon, near impeachment. In fact, he didn't even get impeached. He resigned before the House voted on impeachment because he knew he was going to be impeached. What that led to was not just the downfall of the Nixon administration. This is very important to keep in mind. The impeachment or near impeachment and resignation of Richard Nixon and the entire Watergate crisis and scandal generated a huge wave of reforms, political reforms, that continued to have effect for years thereafter. It also generated many members of Congress, an entire generation, the Watergate class of Congress, composed of extraordinary people, reformers, who themselves accomplished a great deal. In other words, don't simply assume that if this does lead to Donald Trump's impeachment, we don't get anywhere because Mike Pence is there in the background. Well, there is something else that we could get. It could lead to a great tide of demands for political reform. Many of you are more actively involved right now than you've ever been. And that itself feeds and fuels this kind of reform. The other point that connects this Russian connection and what Trump looks like they were involved in, the Trump aides and maybe even Donald Trump himself, with everything else, is Trump's entire do whatever it takes strategy for politics. Win at any cost. We have seen it. In fact, we saw he rose on the basis of a lie about our former president, Barack Obama, saying that he wasn't not even born in the United States. That lie, cynical lie, do whatever it takes lie, created Donald Trump's, the beginnings of his political career, the beginnings of his political base. And he has continued to lie. Why? Because he will do whatever it takes to gain power, and he did whatever it took to gain wealth. You remember, he declared bankruptcy over and over again. He said, basically to his creditors, forget it. He said to people he owed money, contractors, you can basically cry all you want, I'm not going to pay you. Donald Trump's whole philosophy of business and government has been to do whatever it takes to win, to get wealth, to get power. And this is what he has done with our government, what he's doing with our government. Not only did he lie to get into politics in terms of Obama not being born in the United States, but what about the lies about voter fraud? 3 to 5 million fraudulent votes when there's not one iota of evidence. What is he doing there? He is laying the foundation for states that already are moving towards stricter voter ID laws to clamp down even harder on voter suppression. That's what he is really doing. What is he doing with his other lies? His lies about undocumented workers, increasing more and more undocumented workers in the United States, when in fact there have been fewer and fewer last year, the year before. His lies that undocumented workers commit more crimes on a percentage basis than everybody else in the United States. He is turning Americans, and that is part of his strategy, do whatever it takes, at whatever it costs. Turning Americans against each other in order to build his political power base. Firing James Comey, director of the FBI, because presumably Comey was not loyal enough to Donald Trump. Backing repeal of the Affordable Care Act and also deregulating environmental laws and regulations, pulling out of the Paris Accord. Why? Because he's paying back his wealthy patrons, the billionaires that he wants and needs and are going to continue and have said they will continue to finance him in 2020. Do whatever it takes is a cynical, deeply corrupt way of approaching not only politics, but also our democracy. It is fundamentally antithetical to our democracy. I mean, part of the do whatever it takes strategy for Donald Trump is to impugn the integrity of the basic institutions of our democracy, like the courts, judges who disagree with him, people in the press who are reporting on him, calling it fake news. Why is he doing this? Because it helps him build his case. That's what he wants to do. As more and more of this information that is damaging to him comes out, he wants to be able to accuse the entire free press of the United States as being nothing but fake news. So he can say to his followers and build a basis, a political base on the basis of the cynical, do whatever it takes to convince them that he has not been involved, and his campaign never was involved and will not be involved in any kind of a treasonous activity with a foreign power that is generating its own fake news. This morning, the Associated Press reported that Trump aides now, quote, view clashes with the media as central to the president's agenda, unquote. Trump allies plan a campaign, quote, to try to discredit some of the journalists who've been reporting on the matter. They say they will research the reporters' previous work, in some cases going back years, and exploit any mistakes or perceived biases. They intend to demand corrections, trumpet errors on social media, feed them to conservative outlets such as Fox News. Their goal, in other words, is obvious. As the Washington Post's Ruth Marcus has said, it's to produce an army of viewers and readers who are essentially programmed to dismiss any coverage of the Russia investigation that does not immediately exonerate Trump and all members of his campaign team. In other words, in a sense, the Trump team is attempting to pull off something that is ironically similar to what the Russians did during the 2016 campaign. That is, inundate receptive audiences with disinformation, Orwellian disinformation that simultaneously cements a pro-Trump narrative and wreaks havoc on the audiences, on our citizens' trust in real media sources. If there is and was ever an attack on freedom of the press, an attack on our democracy, I have not seen a more cynical attack than this. And so what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Many of you have said to me, you've written to me, you've told me that you feel powerless. I ran into somebody just a couple of days ago who said, you know, I have been involved with the Indivisible Guide.com group in my town. I've written letters. I've done everything I can. I've attended congressional town meetings, and yet this Trump is still there. Why is he still there? After all this, why is he still president of the United States? Some of you tell me you're depressed. Many of you tell me you are depressed. Many of you tell me that you are under great stress. It's been 6 months. Why is he still there? Why isn't he impeached? Well, let me tell you something. Nothing is going to change until either we get a Democratic Congress or a lot of Republicans begin to turn the tide and begin to say, this is unacceptable. The pressure is building, but it builds slowly. It's not going to build immediately. Going back to Watergate, and again, I was there. I remember Watergate. I wasn't there literally, but I remember it. I had a number of friends who were actually in the investigation. Go back to Watergate. It took 2 years between the Watergate break-in and Richard Nixon resigning. Now, some of you may say, I don't think we have 2 years. It's been 6 months. This feels like forever. My advice to you is continue to work. continue to be involved. There is nothing more important. Connect the dots. Understand that the Russian investigation is part and parcel of everything else that we want to achieve in this country, we need to achieve in this country. Stacey, in terms of a single payer, or repairing Flint, Michigan, or getting on with all of the issues, getting even big money out of politics, this is one and the same. It's an interconnected set of issues. It has to do with trust in our system, trust in our democracy. These groups are doing a very important job. IndivisibleGuide.com. Please, if you haven't already, go to your search engine and find the local IndivisibleGuide.com group near you. Help out. Another very, very important group, swingleft.org. I talked with the organizers not long ago. They are actually showing you what you can do in districts that are close to you, that are purple districts or red districts if you are in a blue district. Other groups are organizing as well. You don't need to feel powerless. You don't need to feel helpless. And now your questions. Sue Erickson, how long is impeachment going to take, and what will it take to get the GOP in motion? It's Joe Erickson. I think that it could take, as I said, a couple of years. What will get things in motion before the 2018 election is if a number of members of Congress who are Republicans, a number of either representatives or senators or both who are Republicans, begin to speak out and say this is a potentially impeachable offense. We have right now on this Facebook page, we have our latest video about the actual steps that you need to go through for impeachment. That video shows you exactly what is going to be necessary. Next question. Christina Story, do you think it's now more likely Trump will fire Mueller? What would happen if he does? Well, Christina, I think that if Donald Trump does fire Rob Mueller, who is now the special counsel, and Trump does have the legal right to do that. If he does do that, on top of his firing of James Comey, I think then we have a constitutional crisis. That really is just like the Saturday Night Massacre. I think that act would prompt even Republicans in Congress, pushed by a lot of their constituents, to take action. Holly Lewis, what are your predictions for the 2018 elections? Holly, I think it is possible for the Democrats to retake the House. Now, I would not have said that 6 months ago. I would not even have been as confident 3 months ago. But I think that there is so much public antipathy and anger building up toward what is going on. Not just Donald Trump himself, but also the Trump administration, Betsy DeVos at Education, and Jeff Sessions at Justice, and Pruitt at the Environmental Protection Agency, and all of the other people who are trying to put this nation back to where it was in the 1950s, early 1960s, get away from all of the advances we've made in social justice and protecting the vulnerable and protecting the environment and moving forward on health care for people who are not covered. I think that people just have had enough of this, frankly. And so we do have some very good possibilities. We still have to be organized and mobilized. The Senate is going to be a harder business. I don't want to say that it's impossible, but there are going to be more Democratic senators up for re-election in 2018 than Republican senators. So it's going to be, that's a much, much bigger nut to crack. Teresa Hunt, how do we keep up the pressure on all the important fronts? There are so many. Teresa, And this is the last question. Teresa, I think we can't let up on any of the fronts. If by the fronts you're talking about this investigation of Russia and the connections with the Trump campaign in Russia, and the environment, and everything that is going on with voter suppression, and the Affordable Care Act, and trying to preserve that, I think and if there's one central theme tonight, is that these are all connected in the sense that these are all fundamental breaches of our social contract. These are all steps fundamentally backward. These are all, in a way, some more serious than others, attacks on the democratic process. And therefore, I don't think we can afford to let up or afford to give up on any single area. I attended a indivisible group meeting not long ago, and they have committees. They've divided up into 2018 election, the environment, the Affordable Care Act, and health care, including Medicare for all. These committees, each of these committees, have people who are developing expertise, are working with similar committees in other indivisible groups. This is a hugely important grassroots movement, and it is covering all of the major fronts. And that's what I would advise you to do as well. Join up with others. You can't possibly do it yourself. I want to thank again Sasha Lightman and also Andrew Santana for their enormous help. We're doing this on a summer schedule, which means once a week. But I want to thank you also for everything you continue to do. I understand those of you who are discouraged, those of you who are impatient, some of you who are actually depressed. It goes with the territory. We have not been here before, at least in my lifetime, and I'm getting pretty old. But this is a test. It's a test of our democratic institutions, but more importantly, it's a test of our citizens. Take care. Have a good week. Keep up the fight. I'll see you next.